The silence was a thick blanket, the kind that smothers a summer night in the suburbs. Sarah liked it that way. After a long week of deadlines and conference calls, the quiet of her little house on Sycamore Street was a welcome balm. Her boyfriend, Mark, was off in Vegas for some bachelor party shenanigans, a long weekend of questionable decisions and even more questionable fashion choices, if his pre-trip texts were anything to go by. "Just don't burn down the hotel," she texted back, a playful jab at his notorious lack of culinary skills. "Please," he'd replied, "I'm a responsible adult." Mostly. Yeah, mostly. That was Mark in a nutshell. Sarah chuckled to herself, flipping through channels on the TV. Nothing but reality shows and infomercials. She finally settled on a Law and Order rerun, something familiar and comforting. As she curled up on the couch with a glass of wine, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of loneliness. It wasn't that she didn't enjoy her alone time. She relished it, in fact. But there was a different kind of quiet when Mark wasn't around, a hollowness that echoed in the corners of the house. She glanced at the framed photo on the mantelpiece, a snapshot of the two of them, grinning like idiots at some music festival. They'd been together for 3 years, and while marriage hadn't exactly come up in conversation, Sarah wouldn't mind seeing where things were headed. Maybe after this weekend, she'd bring it up. Or maybe she wouldn't. She was never quite sure how to navigate those kinds of conversations. A shiver ran down her spine, and she realized the AC was cranked a bit too high. She reached for the remote to adjust it when she heard it, a faint but distinct ding-dong of the doorbell. Her heart skipped a beat. It was after 11 p.m. Who could be at the door at this hour? She crept towards the peephole, peering through the tiny lens. The porch was empty. No shadowy figures lurking, no awkward teenagers with fundraising pamphlets. Just the porch light casting a soft glow on the welcome mat. Weird. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorknob. Maybe it was just the wind, or some neighborhood kids playing pranks. She decided to ignore it, chalking it up to an odd coincidence. She went back to the couch, but the Law and Order episode had lost its appeal. She couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Every creak of the old house, every rustle of leaves outside the window, made her jump. She turned off the TV, opting for the company of her own thoughts. A few minutes later, she heard it again. The doorbell, this time more insistent. Ding-dong, ding-dong. Her breath hitched. Okay, this was definitely not the wind. She tiptoed to the door again, her eyes glued to the peephole. Still nothing. But as she strained to see, she thought she caught a glimpse of movement, a flicker of shadow at the edge of the porch. Her pulse quickened. She backed away from the door, a knot of fear tightening in her stomach. She grabbed her phone from the coffee table, her thumb hovering over the 911 button. She knew she was being paranoid. It was probably just some harmless misunderstanding. But what if it wasn't? What if someone was out there, watching her, waiting for her to open the door? She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. She needed to be rational. She was a grown woman, not some damsel in distress. She could handle this. She decided to try a different tactic. She grabbed a heavy vase from the bookshelf, clutching it like a lifeline. Then, she marched to the door, her voice trembling slightly as she spoke. "Who is it?" she called out, her voice echoing in the quiet house. No answer. "I'm calling the police," she warned, hoping her bluff would scare off whoever was out there. Still nothing. She waited, every muscle tense, the vase raised and ready. But the silence stretched on, broken only by the rhythmic tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. After a few minutes, she started to relax, the adrenaline slowly ebbing away. Maybe she had overreacted. Maybe it really was just a prank. She lowered the vase, her grip loosening. She was about to turn away when she heard it. A soft rustling sound, like someone shuffling through the bushes near the window. Her eyes darted to the window, her heart leaping into her throat. She could see the silhouette of a figure moving in the darkness, their shape obscured by the shadows. She gasped, stumbling backward. The vase slipped from her grasp, crashing to the floor with a loud thud. The figure outside the window froze, their head tilting slightly as if they were listening. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know what to do. Should she run? Should she hide? Should she call 911? Before she could make a decision, the figure outside the window took a step closer, their face now illuminated by the porch light. Sarah's blood ran cold. It was a man, his features obscured by a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He had a strange look on his face, a mixture of curiosity and something else, something that made Sarah's skin crawl. He raised his hand, his finger tapping lightly on the glass. Sarah flinched, her eyes widening in terror. "Hey," he said, his voice muffled by the glass. "Anybody home?" Sarah didn't answer. She couldn't. She was frozen, her mind racing, her heart pounding in her chest. The man tapped on the window again, his voice growing louder, more insistent. "I need some help out here," he said, his words sending a chill down Sarah's spine. Sarah knew she had to do something. She couldn't just stand there, paralyzed by fear. She had to protect herself. She took a step back from the window, her eyes still fixed on the man outside. She reached for her phone again, her finger hovering over the 911 button. This time, she wouldn't hesitate. She would call the police, and she would tell them everything. She would tell them about the doorbell, about the rustling in the bushes, about the man at the window. She would tell them that she was scared, that she felt threatened, that she didn't know what the man wanted. But she knew it couldn't be good. She pressed the button, her finger trembling as she dialed the 3 numbers that could bring help, that could bring safety, that could bring an end to this terrifying night. The phone trembled in Sarah's hand as she waited for the 911 operator to answer. Each ring felt like an eternity, each second amplifying the terror that clawed at her insides. Finally, a voice, calm and professional, broke through the static. 911. "What's your emergency?" "There's someone outside my house," Sarah stammered, her voice shaking. "I think they're trying to break in." "Okay, ma'am, please remain calm. Can you describe the person you see outside?" Sarah's eyes darted back to the window, but the figure had vanished. I don't see them anymore," she said, her voice laced with panic. "But they were just there. They were tapping on the window, saying they needed help. And you don't know this person?" "No, I've never seen them before." "All right, ma'am. We're dispatching officers to your location. Please stay on the line and keep me updated if you see or hear anything suspicious." Sarah clutched the phone tightly, her knuckles white. She relayed her address to the operator, her heart pounding with each passing moment. The operator's voice was soothing, reassuring, but it couldn't mask the dread that settled deep in Sarah's bones. "Okay, ma'am, I have officers en route. They should be there in approximately 5 minutes. Please remain inside and do not open the door unless you are absolutely certain it is the police." "Okay," Sarah whispered, her gaze fixed on the window. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that someone was still out there, lurking in the shadows. The operator stayed on the line, asking Sarah a series of questions, her name, her phone number, whether she lived alone. Sarah answered them mechanically, her mind elsewhere, replaying the events of the past few minutes. The doorbell, the rustling in the bushes, the man at the window. It all felt surreal, like a scene from a bad dream. But this was no dream. This was real, and Sarah was trapped in the middle of it. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Sarah heard the sound of sirens in the distance. They grew louder and louder, until they were right outside her house. A moment later, she heard the distinct sound of car doors slamming. "The police are here," the operator said. "Please stay on the line while you answer the door." Sarah took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. She walked to the door, her hand trembling as she reached for the knob. "Who is it?" she called out, her voice barely a whisper. "It's the police," a male voice replied. "We're here to investigate a disturbance." Sarah peered through the peephole, confirming that it was indeed 2 police officers at her door. She unlocked the deadbolt and slowly opened the door. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice still shaking. "No problem, ma'am," one of the officers replied. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a stern expression on his face. The other officer was younger, more reserved, standing slightly behind his partner. "We received a call about a possible break-in," the tall officer said. "Can you tell us what happened?" Sarah nodded, taking a step back to allow the officers inside. "I heard some noises outside," she began. And then someone was tapping on my window. They said they needed help. Did you see who it was? The tall officer asked. No, it was dark, Sarah replied. I couldn't get a good look at them. All right, ma'am, the officer said. We're going to take a look around outside. Please stay inside and call us if you see or hear anything else. The two officers stepped out onto the porch, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Sarah watched them through the window, her anxiety creeping back. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that the man was still out there, watching her. The officers circled the house, their flashlights illuminating the bushes and the shadows. They checked the windows and the doors, making sure everything was locked. After a few minutes, they returned to the porch. We didn't see anything, ma'am, the tall officer said. It could have been a false alarm. But I heard someone, Sarah insisted. I know I did. We understand your concern, ma'am, the officer said. But without any evidence, there's not much we can do. If you see or hear anything else, please don't hesitate to call us again. Sarah felt a surge of frustration. She had called 911. She had told them what she heard, but they were dismissing her concerns. She felt like they didn't believe her, like they thought she was just being paranoid. Thank you, she said, her voice laced with disappointment. The officers nodded and turned to leave. Sarah watched them walk back to their patrol car, their flashlights disappearing into the darkness. She closed the door, locking it behind them. She leaned against the door, her body trembling. She couldn't believe what had just happened. She had called the police for help, but they had left her feeling even more vulnerable. She walked back to the living room, her eyes darting to the window. She couldn't see anything, but she knew that the man was still out there, somewhere in the darkness. She felt a wave of despair wash over her. She was alone, in the dark, with no one to turn to. She was trapped in her own house, a prisoner of her fear. She sank onto the couch, her body shaking uncontrollably. She didn't know what to do. She couldn't stay here, not after what had happened. But she was too scared to go outside, to face the darkness and the unknown. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the fear, trying to convince herself that it was all a bad dream. But the fear was too real, too powerful. It was a cold, hard knot in her stomach, a constant reminder that she was not safe. She stayed on the couch, her eyes wide open, her ears straining to hear any sound, any sign of the man outside. She waited, her breath held tight, her body trembling with fear. The silence stretched on, broken only by the occasional creak of the house settling. Each sound made Sarah jump, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know how long she sat there, frozen in fear. It felt like hours, but it could have been only minutes. Time seemed to lose all meaning, replaced by the all-consuming terror that gripped her. Finally, as the first rays of dawn began to peek through the blinds, Sarah felt a flicker of relief. The night was almost over. The darkness was receding, replaced by the promise of daylight. She knew that the man could still be out there, that he could still be watching her. But the light gave her a sense of security, a feeling that she was no longer as vulnerable. She got up from the couch, her body stiff and sore. She walked to the window, cautiously peeking through the blinds. The street was empty. The man was gone. Sarah let out a sigh of relief, her shoulders slumping. She had survived the night. She had faced her fear, and she had come out on the other side. But the night had left its mark. Sarah knew that she would never forget what had happened. She knew that she would always be a little more afraid, a little more cautious. She walked to the kitchen, her steps heavy. She needed coffee, strong coffee, to chase away the lingering shadows of the night. As she waited for the coffee to brew, she thought about calling Mark, telling him what had happened. But she hesitated. She didn't want to worry him, to ruin his weekend. She decided to wait until he got back, until she could tell him in person. She wanted to see his face, to feel his arms around her, to know that she was safe. She poured herself a cup of coffee, her hand still trembling slightly. She took a sip, the warmth spreading through her body. She was alive. She was safe. But the night had changed her. She would never be the same. The sun was a harsh glare through the kitchen window, mocking Sarah's sleepless night. She'd managed a few fitful dozes on the couch, but every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside, sent her heart racing again. She was a bundle of nerves, her senses on high alert. She glanced at the clock, 7:30 a.m. Mark wouldn't be back until Monday, which felt like a lifetime away. She couldn't stay here alone, not after what had happened. But the thought of going outside, of facing the world after such a terrifying night, was equally daunting. She decided to call her sister, Emily. They hadn't spoken in a while, not since Emily's wedding last year. But Sarah knew that Emily would understand, that she would offer a safe haven, a place to escape the fear that had taken root in her own home. Emily answered on the third ring, her voice groggy. "Hello?" It's me," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. "Sarah? What's wrong? You sound scared." Sarah took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. "Something happened last night," she said. "Someone was outside my house, tapping on my window. I think they were trying to break in." "Oh my God, Sarah!" Emily exclaimed, her voice now wide awake. "Are you okay? Did they get in?" "No, I called 911, Sarah replied. "The police came, but they didn't find anything. They think it was a false alarm." "But you don't think it was, do you?" "No," Sarah said. "I know I heard someone. I know I saw them." "Okay, listen," Emily said. "I'm coming over. I'll be there in half an hour. Just stay inside and don't open the door for anyone." "Thank you, Sarah said, tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't know what I would do without you." "Don't worry," Emily said. "I'm here for you. We'll figure this out." Sarah hung up the phone, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. Emily was coming. She wasn't alone anymore. She went to take a shower, hoping that the warm water would soothe her frayed nerves. But even in the shower, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the pipes, every drip of the faucet, made her jump. She finished her shower quickly, wrapping herself in a towel. She didn't feel safe in her own house anymore. She couldn't wait for Emily to arrive. 30 minutes later, Sarah heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. She ran to the door, peering through the peephole. It was Emily, her familiar red Jeep pulling up to the curb. Sarah opened the door, a wave of relief washing over her as she saw her sister's smiling face. Emily rushed towards her, pulling her into a tight hug. "Oh my God, Sarah," Emily said, her voice filled with concern. "You look terrible. What happened?" Sarah recounted the events of the previous night, her voice trembling as she relived the fear and the uncertainty. Emily listened patiently, her expression growing more serious with each passing moment. "I can't believe this happened," Emily said when Sarah finished her story. "You're lucky you called 911. "I know," Sarah said, "but the police didn't do anything. They just dismissed me." "That's not right," Emily said. "You need to report this again. We're going to the police station right now." Sarah hesitated. She didn't want to deal with the police again, not after the way they had treated her the night before. But she knew that Emily was right. She couldn't let this go. "Okay," she said. "Let's go." They drove to the police station in silence, the tension in the car thick and heavy. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that someone was still out there, lurking in the shadows. At the police station, they were met by the same two officers who had come to Sarah's house the night before. The tall officer, the one who had been so dismissive, looked surprised to see them. "Ma'am," he said, "is there something else we can help you with?" "Yes," Emily said, her voice firm. "My sister was the one who called about a possible break-in last night. We're here to file a formal report." The officer's expression changed, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Ma'am," he said, "we already investigated this matter. We didn't find any evidence of a break-in." "That's not the point," Emily said. "My sister heard someone outside her house, tapping on her window. She felt threatened. That's why she called 911. The officer sighed, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Ma'am," he said, "we take all reports seriously, but we can't do anything without evidence. If you have any proof that someone was trying to break into your house, please let us know." "We don't have any proof," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. "But I know what I heard. I know what I saw." The officer shook his head. "I understand your concern, ma'am," he said, "but without any evidence, there's nothing we can do." Emily was about to protest when Sarah put her hand on her arm, stopping her. She knew that it was pointless. They weren't going to get any help from these officers. "Let's go, Em," she said. They turned and walked out of the police station, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Sarah felt a wave of despair wash over her. She was on her own. No one believed her. No one was going to help her. As they drove back to Sarah's house, Emily tried to reassure her, telling her that everything was going to be okay. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was in danger, that someone was still out there, watching her, waiting for her to make a mistake. When they arrived at Sarah's house, Emily insisted on going inside with her. She didn't want Sarah to be alone, not after what had happened. They went inside, the silence of the house amplifying Sarah's anxiety. Every creak, every shadow, made her jump. She felt like she was trapped in a nightmare, a never-ending cycle of fear and uncertainty. "I'm going to stay with you until Mark gets back," Emily said, her voice reassuring. "You're not going to be alone." "Thank you, Em," Sarah said, tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't know what I would do without you." "Don't worry," Emily said. "We'll get through this. Together." They spent the rest of the day at Sarah's house, trying to distract themselves from the fear that lingered in the air. They watched movies, they played games, they talked about old times. But even in the midst of their laughter and their conversation, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the living room, Sarah's anxiety grew stronger. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching them, that they were not safe. "Maybe we should go to your place," Sarah said to Emily. "I don't feel safe here." "Okay," Emily said. "Let's pack a few things and get out of here." They packed a bag with some clothes and toiletries, their movements quick and hurried. They didn't want to stay in the house any longer than they had to. As they were leaving, Sarah noticed something strange. The basement door, which she had been sure she had locked, was slightly ajar. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't gone down to the basement since she had moved in. It was dark and damp and filled with cobwebs. She had no idea what was down there. "Did you leave the basement door open?" she asked Emily. "No," Emily said. "I haven't been near the basement." Sarah's anxiety skyrocketed. Someone had been in the basement. Someone was still in the house. "We need to get out of here," she said, her voice trembling. They ran out of the house, their footsteps echoing in the silence. They jumped into Emily's Jeep, their hands shaking as they fumbled with the seatbelts. Emily started the engine, her eyes wide with fear. "We're going to be okay," she said, her voice barely a whisper. They sped away from the house, their eyes fixed on the rearview mirror, watching for any sign of pursuit. But the street was empty. They were alone. They drove to Emily's apartment in silence, the tension in the car thick and heavy. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed, that someone was still out there,